Welcome, listeners. I'm so excited to have two guests this week. And I have with me Charlene Polite Corley, who's Nielsen's VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships, and who leads thought leadership and exclusive initiatives, which we'll dig into. We also have Stacie D. Armas, the Senior Vice President of Diverse Intelligence and Initiatives at Nielsen. Welcome, Charlene and Stacie.
Hi,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having us.
I'm so excited. So, one of the things that y'all's research and initiatives really drive home for organizations, especially organizations that might be a little confused right now, is the long-term value of diversity. So, I'd love just to center that and start there. Like, what is the long-term value of diversity?
Well, I think especially for those who are trying to not just stay in business, but grow their business, it's hard to find net new customers without going into the folks who've been historically excluded. So if you are a brand or organization that's looking to stick around long term, you have to figure out how to engage with these different profiles of consumers. And unfortunately, it's not a copy paste. You're more effective when you tap into the different pieces of a consumer's identity. So, from our perspective and our research, every time we do studies from our team talking to consumers, the deeper of an understanding, the more nuance that either programmers, content providers, or creators or advertisers can pull into what they're doing. It just finds it basically, instead of just reaching someone, you find an opportunity to connect with them, and that does help not just drive immediate business, but long-term brand loyalty. And so we hear from our clients all the time, we're all trying to do more with less when it comes to resources. And so for us, this becomes just a no-brainer of something that, oh, by the way, is a good thing to do, but it also is just a smart way to use your resources that you take into account this inclusive data strategy in order to reach not just people in general, but new opportunities for your company. So,
And
um, yeah.
I think that you really underscored it with that. So, Julie, to what Charlene just said, it's increasingly we know that brands and marketers are looking for more performance-based marketing. They're bringing their budgets in. They're looking for more ROI. And as Charlene pointed out, when you have these groups of customers who really haven't have the greatest growth potential, right, and really haven't necessarily had the opportunity to build an affinity for the brand, this is where your investment is going to get you 2x, 3x. This is where you're going to get the bigger ROI. So not only does it make really great business sense, especially as budgets are being compressed, but it's also a really great opportunity also to reach out and build loyalty with customers you haven't had a relationship with in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like basic business. Go to new markets, right? You're going to get more access to more customers, more growth opportunities than continuing to sell and market to the same audience you have historically. I really appreciate the point Charlene made before we hit record about it makes sense to diversify your portfolio, diversify your investments, right? But why does that not translate to diversifying your team, diversifying your people? I'm curious why that concept is challenging for people if it's obvious in other areas.
Well, people are harder than money, right? So people get a little bit more uncomfortable than money a little bit faster. But yeah, I think that's sort of the thing that, again, keeps us very squarely around why we need to continue this work is, you know, people do understand diversifying their portfolio. And so we should understand diversifying the people that we are reaching and how best to reach them. One of the perfect examples from our data on how this shows up is overall, global marketers in our annual marketing report that Nielsen does, global marketers are saying we're putting the majority of our budgets into digital platforms. It's all about digital platforms and performance metrics. We want to be it's a cheaper sort of entry point, and we can get a really faster ROI, right? But when we look at the data about how different consumers behave online, the average person that you're probably talking to as an advertiser online is a person from a historically excluded community, whether that is an African American looking to connect with more nuanced stories or more accurate representation from their experience, or just a woman sports fan who's trying to track the latest, player happenings and scores because she can't find them on TV. So digital has always been a place for these really nuanced communities to show up, and that doesn't always show up in how brands are approaching messaging or campaigning to consumers. And so you have data from Nielsen that shows, Black audiences are averaging about 2 hours more a week than audiences overall across digital spaces. Hispanic and Asian audiences averaging about an hour more a week. And so again, the communities who have historically been left out at the forefront of driving these trends or driving engagement, but are you considering them or centering them in your approach? And so for us, it's very not easy work, but it's a one-to-one about you might have to approach this differently. We have data to help you do that in an effective way. So it is a little bit more challenging, but there are answers and solutions. And so we're happy to do that work.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Yeah, people are trickier. And as you pointed out, I mean, just looking, I always like to start with facts, right? The fact representation is a fact. Diversity is a fact, right? And the buying habits, the media habits, like you said, those are great insights to show we have more opportunity to reach more people. They're spending more time online, but you can't reach them necessarily in the old traditional ways. You have to be more thoughtful and specific to those audiences. So I know Stacie, you specialize in Hispanic audiences and kind of would you mind walking us through kind of like what are some of those nuances if you want to, communicate in an authentic, on-brand way to a new audience? And there's great reasons why, focusing on Hispanic audience is definitely a great growth opportunity. Curious, what do people need to keep in mind?
Well, one of the things that you just brought up too, that it makes perfect sense here as we're talking about historically excluded audiences, or even just in general, the opportunity that presents itself with diverse audiences. Um, and the demographics are quite different, right? So if you think about Hispanic audiences, on average, about 10 years younger than the total market. So of course, leaning more digital, but also you have more opportunity to build loyalty and more time, right? So you're not just getting an audience that maybe necessarily is more digital, where you can perhaps have, more efficient buying, right? And higher ROI, but you're also extending your runway with this consumer. So it's, again, when we talk about 2x or 3x, that's the opportunity. Hispanic audiences tend to be younger, so they're leaning more digital. And there are a lot of opportunities and ways to reach Hispanic audiences that typically are outside of perhaps, straightforward general market advertising, which also brings in more efficiency opportunities. One of the things that I've been exploring with Charlene, and she's really been leading in the vision in this place, is around the emergence of sort of newer sports or sports that haven't typically been high profile in general total market audiences. So think of things like, of course, soccer is tremendous here in the U.S., but it's actually growing among all audiences, not just Latino audiences. We've been talking about cricket, and Charlene has some really great examples around some sports in decidedly female sports that are new opportunities. Again, thinking about efficiencies that really start with diverse audiences and end up growing and having influence throughout all audiences. One great example too was last summer's UEFA Championship, which in July ended up being a huge narrative for all US audiences, while it was really, started among Latino audiences, which is a world championship soccer tournament that took place last year between England and Spain, which ended up being a larger US narrative. So there's a lot of really great, unique opportunities, again, as brands are looking for efficiencies that can take place and really start in diverse audiences and have, quite a broad impact.
Yeah, I'll
Totally.
just jump on there and add one of my other favorite examples from especially the sports case study. When we talk about seeing that growth happen, and there's a couple of points that we always like to make. And one, it's centering one community doesn't necessarily isolate others. And I think Stacie's point around the growth in some of these, huge championships is proof to that. One of my favorite examples is the Messi effect, not only because my 7-year-old loves him, but also because we literally saw it show up in our audience measurement data with I think it was maybe his premiere game, but the Apple TV saw a 32% increase in their viewing of total minute viewing compared to the previous days with no Messi or no soccer involved. So you really see these one-to-one events about centering representation of a community or a person or a sport, and then that really turning into to dividends for different outlets. So it's really, I think sports is such a great case study. We have examples of that as well with the Dodgers winning the World Series last year, and Ohtani really being such a essential part of that. And I think our data saw Asian American or NHPI viewership go up 146%
Right.
year over year, which is a little bit insane to see, a sport that's been around for a century or so get triple digit growth. And again, I think sports has so many great examples of how powerful that can be when you see, you literally get to root for your team, and it brings other folks along.
Yeah,
Yeah.
jumping onto that one, the example around, if I could just add, the example around the Dodgers is such a great one, Charlene, because not only did we see this huge increase among AAPI audiences, we saw everyone really embrace this narrative, multiculturally, specifically in LA where I live, but also really just nationally. And another example of that success is Major League Baseball taking their series openers to Tokyo and doing those. I mean, that's really an international story, right? So they took their series opening to Tokyo this year, and the Series One game this year had a significant increase over last year's Series One game, which was in Seoul. So really, the globalization of this narrative is another example of why we need to speak to diverse audiences here in the U.S. for more than just bringing folks along, but really this is the way that sports and trends and narratives are moving. They are much more global and inclusive in nature.
Yeah.
100%. I would close that one out just by saying, and it's not just about the content. I think the opportunity for advertisers is also very clear. The consumer is really guiding you to say, oh my gosh, I'm so interested in seeing this person, that person, or this type of lifestyle, or this type of struggle or experience in the content that I'm consuming. That also carries over into how folks want to be centered and represented in campaigns. So Black and African American consumers in particular remain the most likely to buy from brands that feature someone from their identity group in their ads. And so again, it's very simple things to do in theory, but with the right folks at the table, with the right data involved in your strategy, these are new opportunities and ways to ensure growth.
I love that. I love those case studies, and sports is so relatable. I mean, it's a great equalizer that everyone can kind of find a sport they're interested in, and of course, like you said, want to see themselves reflected in it. And so, how you craft that message to be inclusive in this global, increasingly global audiences. I think about just my own habits as a white woman getting into women's sports recently. I mean, in
Mm-hmm.
basketball, I live in Indianapolis where the fever is. So the Caitlin Clark effect has been very real here. But also my husband's like a huge soccer football fan, as you would say in other parts of the world. And just, the appreciation for all of these. I always think it's so interesting to learn about. They learn about the players and where they're from, and his star
Yeah.
players from Egypt. And so there's just like a really interesting humanization of it too, for your fan base, a connection. So I think it's interesting to think about this because a lot of times on my podcast and and things that I write, I'm focused on workplace inclusion. And we usually talk about it as internally, employee training, metrics, hiring processes, et cetera. And I don't think a lot of organizations, I mean, I'm sure they do and you work with them, right? But they don't think as externally, especially right now, because it's like a little like, oh, we want to fly under the radar a little bit. But for organizations that I'm just going to guess have a global audience, they want to grow said audience, they want to stay relevant to future consumers. What are some things they should consider or maybe rethink about how they market given all of this growth opportunity?
Well, I'll add, I'll start with saying that obviously, and we've been talking this particular message for at least a decade, but obviously it's important to have people internally that have a really good understanding of what's happening externally, right? So the more you diversify your workforce, the more you're going to be able to tap into unique narratives that perhaps might not be seen by folks that are not within specific community groups. So it's more than just, talent acquisition and development and growth of our people. Having the right people internally allow you to tap into these narratives that are happening externally. And it's not just race and ethnicity, it's gender too, right? We're privileged on our team. We have this amazing Gen Zer who's really helping us tap into great narratives that otherwise I might have missed, or Charlene, or we might, not be privy to. So it's really more than just race and ethnicity. It's across the board, having folks internally that can help you tap into more inclusive narratives externally. And actually, Charlene, if you want to talk about the piece you just worked on very specifically around sinners, it's a great example.
Yeah. Well, I'll follow up what you're saying just by, so much of business is about solving problems. And if you're looking for a way to really just simplify the benefits of diversity, it's more problem solvers. It's, if you got 10 people in who've been, all very similar ways of thinking, then you're probably going to get similar ways to approach a problem. And once you start to diversify that, you might get some new ideas, you might get some new solutions. And so I really do love that around the concept of just bringing in more folks. When it comes to Sinners in particular, the original movie that's breaking all kinds of records from Ryan Coogler, came out of the gate really with a really, number one at the box office and a really impressive start, but coverage that kind of moved the goalpost a little bit about like what success in Hollywood is. They've also surpassed that, break-even even point. So some of that original analysis isn't quite there, but the research that we put out was saying, Black audiences in particular, it's almost an insatiable desire to be represented in media. And I think it was something like over 60% of Black audiences said, yes, I'm going to, they're 65% more likely to go and see a movie opening weekend. But then when you pair that with really authentic and nuanced and inclusive, behind the scenes and on screen programming, it just turned into this really cultural effect that is resulting in bottom line results, right? There's also really great research from I think it's the Hollywood Diversity Report, that shows that as cast members got more diverse, so did the audience base. So really we have research that kind of complements that, showing that over 80% of audiences that we spoke to have at least some level of interest in content that features a different identity group than their own. So all that to say that inclusive storytelling really just brought more folks along. And so you continue to see that. So with the critical success of these types of projects, but also now with the really dominant monetary success as well. So I think another lesson from that is also just as an ally in storytelling, a lot of times it's so much around the care that you give other folks' stories. So not only is Ryan Coogler diving into the African American experience in Mississippi sharecropping, but also the Mississippi Delta Chinese, or the Choctaw of that region, and really giving a lot of attention to detail to those movies. And those are some of the things that are being most talked about, right? Which this movie that's supposed to be a horror story, right? So again, there's just a lot of great opportunities to bring other folks along, and again, to really tap into Stacie's point, tap into unmet need that can return into long-term brand loyalty.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I can just add to that to close it out, when I'm thinking about the next level. So you have content like this, and in this case, we're talking about going to the movies. Eventually, though, a lot of this content finds its way, most of it, all of it, right, onto platforms, streaming platforms. So this creates an environment too to take it back to brands. This particular piece of content and other content, inclusive content, creates an environment for brands where they can invest in that content, of course, right? Have their placement, place their ads, be present in that content. And that actually grows affinity with the consumers that are craving that content because it grows affinity for the brand, I should say, right? That when it's within inclusive content. And we've done a lot of research around consumers saying specifically when brands are present in content that reflects my identity, I'm more likely to buy that content. In fact, I think Black audiences over index in that case. So, kind of segueing it back to business, it's good for a community. We create relevant stories, we build affinity, but then that creates opportunities for brands and others to leverage some of
Mhm.
that through all of the places people consume content, whether, Julie, you brought up earlier, the stories around sports. So it's not just sports content, but there's sports adjacent content that carry the narratives that are meaningful for any given community based on the POV. Well, those are environments that brands can be relevant for you. The same thing we're talking about Sinners, creating content where brands can step into that content through their advertising or adjacent advertising. In this case, when it's on streaming, but you get the idea, right? And it creates more opportunities for brands to really be meaningful and present in the right spaces. Consumers have also told us that they will, if brands devalue and don't invest and don't pay attention and aren't present and relevant in narratives that are meaningful, that they're actually less likely to purchase those brands as well. So
Yep.
there's a lot of opportunities here from a business perspective to be inclusive, and certainly inclusive narratives and storylines really are the center of the opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, to hear those kind of case studies and yeah, why wouldn't you want to be where your potential customers are? Like, why wouldn't you want to be participating in the narrative that they're participating in already? It just seems so common sense, but I think what I'm hearing, at least from organizations that are hesitant with this new administration, is I'm afraid to speak up. Like, what if, not everyone can be as brave as Harvard is right now. There's just this like, I don't know, it's like hesitance or like this, we're going to take a break. And so I would love your thoughts on like why that's obviously a terrible mistake to make. And like, what is something tangible? Like, what is something tangible an organization could do to, be more inclusive, to diversify their audiences and meet people where they're at? I know that was kind of a two-part question, but I'm
Oh,
just curious, like, what can people do to lean through the fear, right? Because this is a short-term thing, like you said, long-term, like you're not in the game if you're not
Yeah,
participating.
I think it goes back to how you started the conversation, and the facts are the facts. So regardless of, what the leadership or administrative strategy is, if as a company that is, responsible to shareholders and doing great business, that requires consumers. And how to best reach those consumers, win with them, retain their loyalty, remain competitive, bring new products to bear. This is a part of focus on how you continue to do that work, and do it well, period. And it's very hard to do that without having a strategy that's inclusive. It just is. Part of what makes our economy so strong, so powerful globally is because we have so many different types of consumers, right? Who are, driven to achieve their American dream. And so without those economic engines across all these different communities, that's trillions of dollars, right? That we don't have. So it's in everyone's best interest, I think, to continue to foster not just freedom, but also economic freedom, and find the ways to best meet those consumers where they're at. And so it's less about, I think, what the work is called, but to continue to just doing good work.
yeah, and I'll add to that, to Charlene's point, 34% of American buying power comes from diverse communities. That would be a lot of people to not pay attention to, right? Or at least to not really invest into more than $7 trillion of buying power. It's a lot of money. And to your point, Julie, earlier when you said, "Boy, these are interesting case studies." All the things that Charlene and I have talked about are available through our Nielsen Diverse Intelligence series. We have those reports and additional diverse narratives to help make that case so that this investment can continue. And again, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it actually has a very in every research piece that we've done, out ROIs a traditional market investment. So it just makes good sense. Those are all available on Nielsen.com, easy to research. We just released our Asian American report in April. In February, in the end of January, we released our Black Consumers Report. Our Hispanic report is coming out in September. And so we have a regular cadence, and we have a LGBTQ report this month in June. So regularly, we have a cadence of research and information available to help make these the case.
I appreciate the bravery. I mean, it shouldn't be brave to report these facts. Like you said, Charlene, this is just what's happening. But, producing these reports and continuing to stand by them is a big deal right now. And so I just want to thank you both for your work. It's important, it's necessary. I personally, I'm going to start shouting that stat about 34% of buying power, or like 34% of buying power comes from diverse communities. This doesn't make sense circling back to where we started. This isn't a long-term strategy to completely disregard over a third of your potential consumers. And so, we need to hear these facts. Leaders need to hear these facts and stand strong and lean into them. And most importantly, connect with these communities that have been underserved, and we all get better. Charlene, something that you said too, and Stacie, like the what this reminds me of is, when you center someone, you don't center one group, you don't, disregard or exclude the other groups. One of the things I learned and starting a nonprofit for conversations earlier with kiddos about inclusion is we need windows and mirrors.
Mm,
And if you heard that concept, it was so powerful for me when I learned this that so you need a window into other communities to see that are different than you, but you need the mirror for you too. And that's just something I've been thinking about recently is like, how do we have this balancing act of windows and mirrors? Because I think what people saw, especially in dominant group, was all the windows got opened and then the mirror
yeah,
was gone. And it's like, I didn't feel like that's what happened, but apparently there was something that happened or a perception. And so this kind of balancing that there's room for all of us, right? And we
yeah.
all learn from each other's stories.
Absolutely. And I'll be clear in saying that centering someone who traditionally has not been at the center doesn't negate, anyone else's story, but it can provide that window for the first time or that nuance for the first time that we haven't been getting, and that enriches everyone's experience.
Right.
So I agree with with the analogy there about windows and mirrors. That sometimes it is time to speak up, sometimes it is just time to listen and learn, and both of those experiences can make us stronger.
Awesome. It's been so lovely to have you both on. Again, appreciate your voices. The research we'll link to in the show notes. I appreciate you just continuing to show up, and that's what we need. So if you're listening and you don't know how to show up, Stacie and Charlene shared some amazing ideas on how to show up and share this information with people at your workplace. If you're getting the sense of hesitance on some of these things, this buying power, I mean, we should do it for the right reasons, but that is, like you said, a responsibility to serve your consumers. Make sure people know about the real facts associated with this work before making snap decisions that are not going to be good long term. Well, thank you both for being on the show. I'm so thankful for your work.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it.